Today we're going to be discussing a unique concept that has been emerging in the literature last couple of decades on followership. We're going to start by talking about the 80-20 rule by Pareto. Vilfredo Pareto was an Italian economist, and in 1902 he created this mathematical formula to explain the distribution of wealth in Italy. It was an economic principle solely, and he basically said that 20% of the people had 80% of the wealth. Dr. Joseph Juran did a lot of his pioneering work in quality management in the 30s and 40s. Much of the groundwork that he laid is still in use today with our quality management and quality improvement initiatives. He was really a giant in his field. He studied and applied the Pareto principle to a larger body of work. He was looking at the economics in a workforce situation and product quality and management quality and worker quality. And he basically said that there were a vital few, very few things that really matter, that are pivotal or impactful. And there are a lot of very trivial things that go on in our workplace that really don't add anything to quality. So examples are varied. Take the commodity of time, which we have talked about extensively in this class. According to the Pareto principle, 20% of our time yields 80% of our results. So what does that mean with the balance of the other 80% of our time? That we probably fritter it away with trivial many pursuits. In terms of jobs, 20% of our work brings us 80% of satisfaction. In leadership, 20% of the people make 80% of the decisions. In terms of effort, 20% of your day produces 80% of what really matters. And again, it gets to that concept of what happened to the other 80% of your day and how did you spend it. And these have real opportunities both for leadership and for followership when you think about, gosh, how can I be more productive with the remaining 80% of my day in terms of time management and energy management, which we have talked about in previous classes. And lastly, in reading, 20% of your book typically has 80% of the content. So what does that mean in terms of leading and following? Does it mean we ought to work harder or work smarter? Well, I think most of us know the answer to that. Our resources of time and energy are limited, and working smarter is definitely the key. Now, in terms of followership, I found this excellent diagram that I recreated, and it really walks you through the whole idea of followership. We're not talking about people blindly following a leader. Let's pick this diagram apart. On the vertical axis, we have critical thinking, and we have one end of the spectrum, a high degree of critical thinking, and then the other end, a low degree of critical thinking. On the horizontal axis, we have participation, passive being at one end of the spectrum and active being at the other. So if we have a high degree of critical thinking, but not very participatory followers, we're going to get followers that are capable of doing great things but are kind of alienated or not really involved. If we have a low degree of critical thinking and very passive participation, we get the sheep, the people who just blindly follow other people without really thinking, hey, you know, what am I doing here? On the high degree of critical thinking and high degree of participation, very active participation, we get effective followers. Followers that really engage in the leadership mission and vision and participate in achieving results. With a low degree of critical thinking, but a very active participation, we get the yes people. The people who just kind of politically say yes to anything just to get ahead, but aren't really that engaged in terms of critical thinking. So hopefully that crystallizes for you that really the upper right-hand block of people, the effective followers are the followers that are desirable, the people who have a high degree of critical thinking and a high degree of active participation. So you can see that being a follower isn't just blindly following someone along, but really being engaged in that whole leadership, followership continuum. So let's go back to the 80-20 principle and think about how we can maximize our time and our energy when we're both leading and following others. The first principle is, do we organize or agonize? Our day, as we've discussed many times before, is limited in terms of time and energy. So how are we going to spend it? Are we going to spend it on those items that are of high importance and high urgency? Or are we going to fritter it away on the things that are low importance and low urgency? And on your handout on PAL, this goes into more depth of these concepts. So I would encourage you to look at that handout. The next principle is choose or lose. Who will fill my calendar and who will I see? Again, we know that if we don't actively choose who's going to fill our calendar will fill for us. And then at the end of the week or month or year or decade, we'll say, gee, I really lost this potential to seek this colleague out and develop some maybe give and take in terms of exchange of ideas or knowledge. So the 80-20 time says that fill your calendars by priorities. The things that are high importance and high value, make a proactive effort to fill your calendar with these resources and people. Take the lead. Pick up the phone or send an email and make contact with somebody. Hey, I'd really like to get together with you and learn from you. Can we sneak in a cup of coffee or some time during lunch to exchange ideas? Spend time planning and anticipate problems. Invest time with people and again initiate those contacts. The next principle is evaluate or stalemate. This is typically called the 3 R's: required, return, and rewarding. So think, what is required of me? Make a list and prioritize. If we make a list and it's overwhelming, then we tend to get immobilized. So prioritize the things that absolutely have to happen versus the things that, gee, that would be nice, but it's not that critical. What gives me the biggest return? And in terms of the 80-20 time, this resource that I found talks about abuse, disuse, and misuse. Abuse is too few employees doing too much, and that leaves those employees at high risk for burning out and the rest of the employees rather disengaged. Disuse is too many employees doing too little, and again you have to think of allocation of resources. Misuse is too many employees doing the wrong thing. Again, in terms of the 80-20 time and choosing what priorities we spend our precious time and energy accomplishing, think, what is the most rewarding? And again, it goes back to that worth it tool that we looked at a couple of weeks ago. Don't overestimate the unimportance of practically everything, and that hints again at that 80% of our day, our time, our job is spent with the trivial many. You cannot have it all. We all know that as students in nursing schools, whatever degree we're seeking, full-time jobs, family responsibilities, we can't do it all. And many priorities tend to paralyze us. So again, look at the ones that are high value and high importance. And when little priorities can demand too much of us, big problems arise because we tend to fill our day with all the trivial many and ignore the vital few. Good sometimes is the enemy of best. In the Maxwell book that I've spoken of several times already this semester, there was an incredible story of deciding between two options. It was a story about a lighthouse keeper whose charge was to preserve a winter's worth of oil and to keep the light burning in the lighthouse. That was their only priority. But gradually, people in the village figured out that the lighthouse keeper had oil, and it was a harsh winter, and resources were scarce, and so people come knocking on the lighthouse door, begging for a quart of oil here, a quarter of oil there, for reasonably good reasons. But nonetheless, the lighthouse keeper strayed from his primary mission and vision to keep the lighthouse burning. And he ran out of oil at the midwinter, and many freighters and steamers full of precious cargo and people were lost on the rocks due to the lighthouse not staying lit. Time deadlines and emergencies often force us to prioritize. If we've got, say, a deadline at work or at school, we are going to say, oh gee, I'd really like to go out with the girls, or I'd like to sit and watch this television show. And again, these are all good options, but they're not the best option at that particular time. We all know that change is a constant factor, and priorities never quote-unquote stay put. So we're always challenged to reevaluate using the 3 R's, eliminate the things that don't meet our current goals, and estimate the amount of time and energy that a project might take. So again, in terms of discussion, I would encourage you to really look at this 80-20 principle in your personal and professional life, especially if you are struggling with time and energy allocation, and look to see where you're spending time on your trivial many versus the vital few. This is a very interesting story. Some of you may be familiar with it, but it hints at that resistance to change, and we all have that tendency to want priorities to stay put. But I would encourage you to really realize that priorities never stay put, that they are always changing, and we must stay flexible. Hippocrates described scurvy in ancient times, so this was something that was not new to medical science. And in 1553, Cartier, who made his famous second trip to Newfoundland, documented that he lost many of his crew members due to scurvy. On that mission, however, they encountered the Iroquois Indians of Quebec, who had this quote-unquote miracle cure. They made an infusion of pine tree bark and leaves, and many of his crew members who were suffering from scurvy were cured, and he was marveled by that. In Elizabethan England, Admiral Sir Richard Hawkins noticed that citrus was effective in curing scurvy. Now he noted this in 1553. Over his entire naval career, 10,000 seamen died due to scurvy, and that was a large number of military men to lose. But his observations that citrus was effective in curing scurvy went virtually unheeded. Dr. James Lynn, who was a British naval surgeon, conducted scientific experiments on scurvy. He published evidence in 1753, so almost 2 centuries after Hawkins' observations, that lemon and lime juice were effective as a cure for scurvy. This physician was totally ridiculed for his findings, how absurd that fruit juice would cure such a disease, and his advice was literally ignored for 40 additional years. One captain, however, followed his advice, Captain James Cook, who went on a 23-week voyage without a single case of scurvy. So again, problem solving and thinking outside the box and looking at new things is always appropriate and always a principle that is vital in leadership. I hope that you get on PAL and look at all the additional resources about followership and this kind of synergy between leadership and followership. And I look forward to seeing you on the discussion board, and I hope you all have a fantastic week.